So, just to back up a little bit, uh, this the book that we're discussing tonight is his 16th or is it 17th book? Um, and as we were
Depends how you count it.
using the metric system or the imperial system,
Right.
right? And it's he's already uh, um, working on his next book, which we discussed a bit at the beginning of the Zoom call. Um, this book could be considered the paradoxical fourth book in his autobiographical trilogy, which includes Shush, growing up Jewish under Stalin, In the Jaws of the Crocodile, and Farewell, Mama, Odessa. He's also the author of many satirical stories published both before and after his emigration, and in Russian and in English and in Polish. Like the book about his time in the Soviet satirical newspaper Crocodile, his new book combines essays, memoir, and fiction. The satirical stories complement and punctuate the nonfiction sections of his book in a really interesting way. If you take a look at his book, you'll I'm sure agree. And Emil has a remarkable capacity for self-reflection and for analysis of the very genre he works in as a creative, to use the current vernacular. And if you'll indulge me just for a brief and relevant anecdote, when Vladimir Nabokov was being considered for a professorship in Russian literature at Harvard back in the day, the only dissenting voice was that of the eminent linguist Roman Jakobson. But what's your objection? His baffled colleagues asked. Nabokov is a great writer, Jakobson replied. The elephant is a great animal, but we don't appoint one to be the chair of the zoology department. Like Nabokov, Emil is a great elephant and a productive zoologist. His publications also include scholarly works on a variety of topics, including the 19th century satirical writer Saltykov-Shchedrin, two edited volumes of Russian poetry from the 19th and 20th centuries. I first read Emil's academic work when I was writing my own book about Soviet humor. I devoured his two seminal volumes about the Soviet oral joke, the anecdote, one about ethnic humor called Taking Penguins to the Movies. You'll have to read the book to know what that is a reference to, unless you know Chukchi jokes. And one about sexuality and gender in Soviet and Russian humor, titled Making War, Not Love, a title that has perhaps acquired a new significance since 2014 and especially since February 2022. If you'll indulge me one last time, I want to say a few words about how Emil's current book uh, brought to the surface my own memories of third wave Soviet emigration, the issue of refuseniks, and the arrival of hundreds of thousands of Jewish emigres to my home state of New York when I was obviously a child. One memory is the Robin Williams film Moscow on the Hudson, which is my Generation X's introduction to the topic for many people who were not otherwise um, that aware of what was going on in the world. The other memory is also from the realm of comedy, and also sort of illustrates that the issue of incongruity, of comic incongruity of the emigre in uh, in their new country um, has been a rich topic of a rich source of humor, and I'm really glad that Emil is considering this. And this memory is from Saturday Night Live, which Emil does mention in his introduction. Actually, in 1975, the Saturday Night Live was brand new, and one of the characters was played by Gilda Radner, was this very kind-hearted but a bit deaf and prone to malapropisms, a woman named Emily Latella, and she would give these monologues about current events in the news as part of um, the news skit. And one of the first ones she did, she began this way: "What's all this fuss I hear about saving Soviet jewelry?" So, with that very personal memory, uh, I want to just turn it over to Professor Draitser to speak about his book. And
Yeah. So, yeah.
um, so maybe since the book is about a modern exodus, um, the mass immigration of Russian Jews from the USSR in the 70s, you talk about the actual exodus, right? The exodus in the Bible. Are there any parallels between your experience and the in the 70s and that exodus and the biblical exodus.
Thank you for your question. If I can share a screen just to show the covers of my book, previous books, and probably the most important, the map of the current, I mean, the modern day exodus that I have. Can I, right? I assume.
Yes, let me
Yeah,
give you.
I see, and this what I. Yeah. So this is the current book is continuation, actually the fourth in the Shush growing up Jewish understanding. Actually covers. It has okay direct relationship to the current book, but because it shows the situation of during World War II and immediately anti-Semitism right after the end of World War II in late Stalin's period. Then the second book, as Seth already informed you, is The Joss and the Joss of Crocodile. It's about my attempt to take part in Russian literary world as a satirical writer, actually, which is, I talked about it a few times before, but happened by chance. I just happened to be born in the city of Odessa, which was unofficial capital of humor in the Soviet Union. So once when I came, I wanted to be a writer. I brought some lyrical piece to a newspaper, and they said, well, it's well written, but you have some kind of accent. What is it? And he says, where are you from? I said, from Odessa. Oh, you know what? You have to write a satirical piece for us. So it's assumed that if you're born and raised in Odessa, you are immediately possess sense of humor. It turned out to be that I had quite a career of that sort. And then finally, the third book, Fair Mama Odessa, it's about immigration, which is autobiographical novel. Everything there is absolutely true to life. I just took some license of my first 5-year experience in America. I put it in the form of a book. All right, and now since we talk about Exodus, this is probably the modern day Exodus. Was I showed from Odessa to this by train to the railroad station of Chop, and then through Bratislava to Vienna, and then to Rome, where we stayed to get visas to America, and then coming to America. All right. Now, what is then obviously when I start working and I start asking myself a question: what is the difference? Oh, obviously, huge difference between Exodus biblical and our. However, there are quite a bit of things that are coincide. To my astonishment, first and foremost, the quantity, the amount of in biblical when you read a biblical Exodus, you'll see that the Bible says 600,000 men, not counting children. Interesting, don't mention women. So if you take it all together, then it's about 1.5 million. That's exactly about the same amount that people left. I mean, Soviet Union from 1974, my time, to 1991, to the collapse of Soviet Union. So that was interesting. However, in so many other ways, there were similarities. Of course, we know from Bible about slaves running from Egypt. None of us kind of fit the image of the slave, but in essence, we were slaves on many levels. For example, let's start with sustenance. For average immigrant, we barely survived on a salary wherever they had, and we had to often, ask our friends to give us some money till the paycheck, and then give them back, of course, after that. So, moreover, we could not move. You could not. First of all, you live where you're allowed to live. And some places you could not, for example, decide, okay, I would like to live in Moscow. No way. you have to have special permission. Plus, you cannot travel. Like, it's hard for on my first kind of stages of my American life to tell American that it was difficult to just to travel even to the neighboring countries in Europe from Odessa, because you have to be politically cleared. Means you have to go to the local party committee, to the Raikom, means regional party committee or whatever it is, and get permission. You have to get through CBC, and they check out your political stand and so on. Even to that extent, I remember the underground jokes of that time was the following: that a group of, secondly, you cannot travel individually. Usually you have to come in a group. So the following underground joke was, as far as I remember, goes like that. A plane with a group of Soviet tourists is approaching Paris. And one tourist gets up and says out loud, "Anybody here knows how to say in French, 'I would like to ask for political asylum'?" Immediately, Amanda gets up and says, "What does it mean that you're planning to ask for political asylum in France?" "No, no, no," says the tourist. "I just want to know who is the most important man in this group." In other words, the group travel usually was under supervision of the secret police, and you have to be cleared and so on. So from many point of view, needless to say, no right for private property, no. In so many ways, you were limited in your human kind of capacity. So therefore, it's for we means I'm part of this generation who ran from the Soviet system. We felt that this is a chance. This is an opening all of a sudden window. Okay, the reason is probably most of you know. The reason is very simple. Why it was allowed. First of all, allowed for a small, very small group of people, means national minorities. What the specific formula was? Minorities, majority of which live in capitalist country. It means you joined your extended family, and and so on. But the true reason was simply that Soviet Union needed grain from United States, from Canada, who could not sustain without it. That's why they found a way politically correct, more or less, and to allow it. So that primarily that was the reason why we were in. I mean, if you compare to immigrations, yeah.
Thank you very much. In the book, you go through some in very interesting ways, sort of detail, including with the passages from the Bible, which are very instructive as well. Now, in the second part of the book, is called "Discovering America," and in this part, you talk about aspects of American culture and life that were a challenge for an immigrant from the former Soviet Union, specifically. So, can you talk a bit about what some of the aspects of American life?
For people who remember that time, most of you know that in most places in the Soviet Union there was shortage of food simply in the stores. So, needless to say, many of us experienced shock when we came to supermarket. It was overwhelming. We could not understand not only why this particular item, okay, we understand it exists, but why we have to choose between 4, 5, or 6 brands of it? That was too much. And to that extent, I remember by that time, somebody, a year after my immigration, 1976, a Soviet pilot, Belenko, who took the kind of the most advanced Soviet plane and defected to Japan. And he was brought to the United States, to Washington, D.C., of course. He was briefed. And so one day, obviously the CIA agent who took him from hotel back to the briefing and back asked him, you know what, if you permit me just 1 second, I need to stop, and my wife asked me to buy instant coffee, if you don't mind, with me. So he went together with him and got this coffee and got in. And Belyanka, all of a sudden, the agent noticed that Belyanka changed, his mood changed to, he became angry, he became closed up. I say, what's the matter? I said, I don't understand it. Why I risked my life, I did everything, why you have to do this show? He could not believe that the regular supermarket that he saw in Washington, D.C. was not staged. He assumed that it was staged specifically for him to seduce him anymore, although there was no reason, obviously. So to that extent, that was a tremendous kind of a change of with the same comes, obviously, something that we did not experience at that time, Soviet Union, advertisement. It was annoying, so much advertisement. And I came with satirical, of developing satirical mind. I even wrote a piece about a devil selling, not buying, but selling human souls because of all of these people. In other words, to show the extreme of the salesmanship. I mean, this is something we were never experienced. There was no need for salesmanship as such. Now, but what is more important is that the attitude toward work. This is something was totally different, because on many levels. First of all, in Soviet Union of my time, means 1970s, was placard. Labor is a matter of honor, a matter of honor, and so on and so forth. Now I come to America and I pay attention. What is the TGI? What is this, some kind of a supermarket? I mean, cafeterias. So I ask some Americans, say, oh, thank God it's Friday. Oh my God, how can, so Americans clearly said, okay, I work all day long, all month, all week long. Now finally I can relax before the weekend. That was very difficult to understand, because we all, again, if you want to compare with slave labor, in a way it was a slave labor because we're not interested in the result of it. So there was a lot of underground Soviet jokes of that time, like, for example, no matter where you work, it doesn't, as long as you don't work, okay? Or horses are dying from work, and so on and so forth. But at the same time, the attitude toward work of America was totally different from attitude toward work in the Soviet Union. In a particular episode that comes to my mind is that one of the Americans who I befriended, who tried to help the newcomers. He once said to me, I don't understand it. What is this? I try to help. Okay, in America, to help someone, it's not to give money, it's to give work, if he can work, of course. So he gave work to a couple of immigrants. And he said, I don't understand. And he owned a small company of producing drapes and so on. And he said, they take long smoke outs. They are, in other words, they don't appreciate what is given to them. And this is totally, of course, a totally different attitude. So a lot of things that very, very difficult was to accept on daily level. At the same time, as we did, frankly, I didn't need much of practically no Americans before I immigrated, and I didn't know to expect them. Of course, Soviet propaganda portrayed them as being all greedy, all because everybody's for himself, dog eat dog, right? Is the expression. But we turned down that they were overall very kind of a kind, even kind of toward the newcomers, showed goodwill, good kind of friendliness. For example, I would say, the first thing we would say, oh, my English is not good, but Americans would say, oh, your English is much better than my Russian, as if they need Russian. Of course, they don't. But just to illustrate how bad our English was, because obviously I knew just basic English, for reading, but they didn't know much. I and many other immigrants didn't know much about the idiomatic English. So one day, I remember I called a local bank in Santa Monica and said, okay, I was told they have to call Mr. Smith, who is in charge of loans to buy a car. I needed to buy a new car. So I called him and the secretary says, I'm sorry, but Mr. Smith has passed away. So I immediately say, well, when he's coming back? So in other words, I knew the word pass, but pass away, that was something more complicated for us. Yeah, so that to that extent. Also, probably I should talk about the Americans' attitude toward no, okay. And it came to kind of the first kind of on the surface of it, it looks like there is some cult of ignorance there. Even I know that later on I found that Isaac Asimov published an article in one of the Newsweek, I believe, in the 60s about the cult of ignorance. But at the same time, it came to me through a popular song. The popular song was like this. It's a wonderful world. It's a wonderful world. And the boy sings, I don't know much geography. I don't know much algebra, but I know I love you. And for us coming, what I mean, this is the pickup line that he's ignorant and he tried to kind of attract a girl. What is this? For us, it was totally to understand that whole. It took me years, of course, because I got another education in literary science at UCLA. It took me many years later to understand that the knowledge in America is given as much as you want to have it. In other words, like an inverted pyramid. The more you, let's say, you go to a graduate school, it's much more harder to get to go to study there, and the higher the level, the more difficult it is. Something that we didn't know. Actually, even we found that in high school, at the last years of high school in America, students can have a choice. Not such a thing. There was not such a thing as choice in Soviet school. But the American student had a choice what they want to concentrate in, what is more important for them, and so on. So that also came with time later on, not right away. Another probably right in the face of it, we could not believe the American care about handicapped people. This is something that was total shock. I remember I grew up right after the World War II, and I remember the streets of Odessa, people who, men who survived World War II were without feet. They were roaming around on the sidewalks and without, an awful state. In America, we see kneeling buses just to help people to step in. Something that seems to be normal in America, parking space for handicapped people, or the sidewalks especially constructed so if you're on wheelchair, you're easy to, and so on. This was totally different. But what happened that I learned much later with the Soviet World War veteran who survived and were mutilated, a few years after the war was over, they were all taken from the streets away because they spoiled the view for the foreign tourists. If they come, it's not a good picture and so on. So that was a total kind of a change that we could not right away to acknowledge. Yeah. So what else? What I would also talk about the, needless to say, the car. The car in America, or needless to say, almost everybody has a car, and it plays a major role in them. And we found that actually because of that, the attitude toward Americans to their car almost like to a living being. For example, my daughter, when she immigrated, she was kind of a local community gave her a used car. So the family who brought this car took a selfie with the car. In other words, like almost part of the member of the family to which had done. And second, I was by chance I met by in 1987 it was a conference on international humor symposium in Philadelphia, I believe. Yeah, and I met Art Buchwald, but was of course very famous American satirist, and I met him. Obviously, he was interested because he was published in Pravda almost everything, because he was critical about White House and CIA, whatever it is. So, and before that, the Soviet delegation came to from Crocodile to America, already time of perestroika, of Gorbachev. And so I told him that, you know what, they asked me why I left the country, the greatest country in the world, and so on. And I said that I didn't mumble something, I didn't say anything. To which Boko told me, you should have told them that because they didn't give you parking space. I not even had dreamed of having a car in Soviet Union, because by and large, very few people could afford it and so on. So all of this kind of the car, it's totally different. But if you talk about more kind of more important things, not the first of, one of the things, for example, friendship. Friendship in Russia is very important for survival. I mean, I'm talking about Russia as I left it. I'm not talking about today's Russia. It was important. Oftentimes, even to have a friend is more important than another kind of member of a family, because so many things will just survival. We help survive. In America, that's what I kind of in time realized, that American are first and foremost are built on the Protestant culture of self-sustain, means I'm okay, I can manage and so on, okay? And this is different. In other words, I have over the years, of course, I had maybe at least a half a dozen of American friends with whom I continue relationship, but it's different. The friendship is on the premises that each of us can handle their affair. In other words, I don't expect my friends to do something for me, some run errands or something like that, because it doesn't fit the sustaining kind of a ideal that you have. Yes, and also the sense of what a success means to begin with is, it happened that I have in the middle of my life, or at least for a shortened period of time, I was alone, and I consulted with my American friend how you look for a mate in America. At that time, it was popular to put, to answer personal ads. He said, why wouldn't you, New York Review of Books personal ad, answer some of them? So I started reading them, and I told him, wow, look, looks like they all want me. They want, I mean, something cultured and intelligent. Well, at that time, I already finished my UCLA grad school, got my doctor and so on, successful. And my friend told me, Emil, I'm sorry, you're not successful. I say, what do you mean? But that time already, you mentioned that already in your introduction, I published 5 or 6 books. He said, no, 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 no. America successful means you have a lot of money. You succeeded in life and things like that. So obviously it was a different kind of attitude to it. Yeah, so there are some other things that I discovered in America. In a way, it is, I was lucky. I was lucky because when I came to America, one of my first publications, you said, knows, was a collection of Soviet underground jokes, forbidden laughter. And it became a kind of a sensation, sort of, because I didn't know about it, that in America there was a strong kind of a stereotype of Russians incapable of smiles, of laughter, and so on. And when we go back to images that were, let's say, from Russia with Love, this Russian character is very somber. Even Ninechka, if you remember, she smiles only at the end of it when she falls in love with, otherwise she's smileless at all, and so on and on. And obviously in the book I go more about it. But basically that's and at that time the book came out when the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan. So probably the interest was in New York Times, Washington Post, and other places, because they thought, well, if Russians, after all, have sense of humor, maybe we can negotiate, maybe we can stop kind of to come to some agreement and so on. And I remember that the joke of that time, it was most popular with Americans, was, will there be the Third World War? Actually, it's not different from now, as I understand. And the answer is no, but it will be such a fight for peace. Not a stone will be left unturned. Okay, so that kind of a thing. Yeah, so from that standpoint, definitely I would say that that is the first kind of things that about American life that I had to handle. Yeah.
Thank you very much. So, I just my first trip to the Soviet Union was in 1989, and I had the opposite. You know, I had discoveries that were kind of the counterpart to yours. That I would, you know, it was very, and you know, everything with all the caveats necessary. That it was refreshing to see, you know, a store that was called Milk or Bread, without 50 choices of instant coffee. And also one of the reasons that I ultimately chose to study Soviet humor was, you know, was that 5 minutes there, you know, shattered any Cold War uh, um, images I had of, as you describe it, the dour, unsmiling Soviet people, and you know, as you spend 5 minutes there, and it was dispelled that. Um, so the third part of your book, you move on to a more introspective um, uh, tone. That is, you talk about how you discovered in yourself after emigration those aspects of the culture in with which you grew up in and accepted uncritically. Can you talk a little bit about that process?
Yes, one of the things that we kind of it was kind of obviously when you grow up and you accept everything as given as how else it could be. But when you come to a totally different culture, you know, what I say that all immigrants of the world come to America thinking that it will be like their home country, but better, okay? But that America is built on totally different DNA. It has totally different kind of basis. It comes with the time. When you come, you live. And as you said already, at the end of this year will be 50 years since I live in the United States. But one of the things, for example, how we survived to begin with in the Soviet Union, because because of the oppressive sense of the system, we did not pay attention to any prohibitions and laws were, however, people, well, it was a mess since I worked for a while. I was writing for a magazine Crocodile. It was open knowledge that people steal as much as they can, whatever they can, because otherwise, how can they survive? And in America, I found all of a sudden that the Russian Émigré community brought it with it and assumed that this is the same thing in America. That law makes, okay, there is a Russian saying, "Закон как дышло, куда повернешь, туда и вышло." Means the law is like a carriage drawbar. Wherever you turn it, it will go. In other words, who cares? And this is something that totally shocked me. For example, even when I saw American Russian newspaper in Russian, they published an ad saying, well, in Russian, it's деловой брак, business marriage. So I couldn't understand, what does it mean, business marriage? So I called and asked, why would newspaper publish something about merging companies or something of that sort? No, said they, no. It just simply means that if somebody, some foreigner wants to come to America and have a legalization, so on, when he comes to agreement with a person who has American citizenship, it will, wait a minute, that time I already knew. It's from 5 to 8 years of prison. It's for you are violating one of the federal laws. Okay, whoa, we don't care. We said we carry no responsibility for published whatever. It's between people and so on. So this is something that was hard to stomach, but it continued all the way through, because it was the only way, I repeat myself, the only way people could survive in the Soviet Union is to steal from the government, who steals from them. Means the salaries were so low that there was no other way to survive as by supplementing your income by doesn't matter what, where you are, and so on, oftentimes. So that was really something that is, I did not realize with Bartok. Secondly, and this one probably the most kind of a to me, the most kind of how to say, ironic trait is that we could not understand protesting. Okay, Soviet Union had no history of protesting. There was a known 5 minutes protest against invasion of Czechoslovakia on the Red Square, and they all were immediately arrested and sent to Gulag. That's all. So here, a real life incident actually promoted the fall. I was still a student a graduate student at UCLA. And as I was passing by, a secretary called me, Emil, could you answer the question when somebody is calling, asking about some Russian language question? So I asked, and a woman asked, I said, would you, could you tell me, please, you have a kind of a personal name for a tiger. I say, tiger, personal name? I say, well, I usually don't socialize with tigers. But if it's, let's say, a cat, we call it Kisa. And she said, wonderful, okay. I say, why you need it? I mean, well, we are organizing protest to save Siberian tigers. So we'll already have a photo of a nice tiger face, and we'll put Save Kisa, right? Kisa is the name of it. And then I wrote kind of a going kind of in satirical way, look, in America, they protest all the time of all kinds of stuff, and make, obviously, as a matter of humor, exaggerated stuff and so on, anything that, just to protest and so on. And then it took me, after a while, yeah, the most important, that's what interesting. It was not only published in Russian, that I understood. It was published in English in Los Angeles Herald Examiner. The only thing they changed the title of the, I discuss it in the book, they changed the title of my piece, kind of making fun of the kind of a blaming on Uncle Sam everything. Anyway, to make it short, for me, I realize if not protests in America, I would not be able to come to America. Only because of the huge Soviet Jewry movement in America, with people lining up streets, and I have some picture, no personal men who helped me on my first wave, how it would never happen. You know, so this kind of realizing that this is totally different country, totally different country. Yeah.
Thank you. Just moving through your journey that you describe in the book. The last part of the book you title "The Road to Americanization," where you get a bit more, you zoom out and get a bit more philosophical. And so what does the path that you're describing here comprise, and to what extent can someone become American after living in the Soviet Union, or become a full-fledged representative of one country after leaving their home country?
Well, unfortunately, what I came to realize until literally the episode like last week, I'll tell you right why, that it's basically impossible. You know, it's American. I realized that there's American proverb. You can take a country boy out of the country, but you cannot take country out of the country boy. Same goes true for any coming from another culture. Yes, of course, to many aspects, I became more American, realizing all of this. But still there are things still now, mind you, almost 50 years I'm in this country, puzzle me in American culture. For example, I had a longtime friend actually during my UCLA grad school years, and I often talk to him on the phone. He lived on the other side of the country. I live in East Coast. He lives on West Coast. And during our conversation, all of a sudden, there was a break. His voice became weak and then stopped. And I got kind of worried what's going on, and then stopped. So I called our mutual friend. We were together in this grad school at UCLA, and she said, "Well, wait a minute, let's quickly check his address." I said, "Why do we need his address on the phone?" Well, I'm going to call police. I say, "Police? You're going to call police?" You see, in the mind of Soviet citizen, police, is the least thing you will call police when you're in trouble. Okay. And she said, "Well, yeah, they perform wellness check." I had no idea. And that really happened. That she called police. They came to the building where he rented. A manager opened with the key. Even they found him. He fainted on the floor. They called ambulance. He was taken to the emergency room. So things like I totally didn't understand. Moreover, even on more kind of on daily basis, still today, if I receive something from any authority, I tremble. IRS informed me that I did not pay whatever, although I knew I paid, and I became very alarmed. But my neighbor, American, said, "We don't." I say, "Why?" He said, "Because we know our rights." You see, I had no idea about any rights. It turned out to be, of course, I cleared up. But that's what it means. You're still carrying the culture in which you grew up. It's not easy to get rid of it. That's what I'm saying.
As I mentioned in my introduction, one part of this book, as with one of your other books, is you include the full text of a lot of the stories that you wrote for publication in Russian and in English. Can you talk a little bit about why you included that in a book that's first and foremost a memoir?
Because basically that's what gave me idea to write this book. Because when I looked at my own publication in America, for the first 10, 15 years, I realized that was written by a Soviet satirist, not American, because so much of it I simply could not understand. And so I used my Soviet upbringing in mind and so on, despite being, needless to say, being so anti-Soviet by on many ways. I hated the system and so on. Still, it still was in you because you're fed with in the Soviet Union. You were fed from childhood on, indoctrinated on so many levels, and so you don't know anything to compare with. That's what you are. So therefore, when I was thinking about this book, I basically my whole book is built on kind of chapters, and I took my published essay about the 10, 15 years upon the arrival of America with the view I see it now, what I learned after that. Okay, in other words, almost like to provide this contrast with my today's understanding of America and the one that I brought in, and provided that kind of a how to say, the contrast of what does it mean to come to 50 years, I repeat, 50 years time. It's not simply, overnight. It still showed that so much of it in the first stages in American life, I could not understand, definitely. Yeah.
Good. Just as an American who's emigrated for different reasons to the UK 15 years ago, I still find myself, for example, looking the wrong way crossing the street and to my own potential injury. Well, thank you so much, Emil. And now I want to open it up for any questions that that our patient listeners might have for Emil. Either raise your hand or just jump right in.
Hi, can I ask a question, please?
Of course.
Hi. First of all, thank you so much, both of you, for a really, really fascinating session. One question I had is, have you ever considered, particularly post-89, going back?
Ever considered to go back into Soviet Union? Definitely not. I ran from Soviet Union. But if you ask me, after all, 1991, Soviet Union collapsed, I visited Soviet Union a couple of times for professional reasons. I did research for one of my books, a biography of Soviet spy who I happened to meet a year before I left the country, Dmitry Bessalyotov. And I found it, now we're talking about the years 2004. I found it a foreign country for me. I knew the language, of course, most of it, not needless to say, the slang, some other stuff. But I could not understand the people anymore, their psychology. They lived through so much different. After all, we understand, I left in 1974, that I could not, I felt that it's a totally foreign country for me. Yeah.
Thank you. Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, just as a sort of follow-up corollary question, how long had you been in the US before you started thinking of the US as your home?
Actually, there was no sense, there was no period of thinking whether I had no other home. Remember, when we, very few people realize it, when we left the Soviet Union, there was no way to come back. We were stripped of our citizenship, for which we paid, I remember, at least half a year's salary. And we were not coming back. I had no citizenship, whatever. Okay, so from that standpoint, I never felt of going home, going back, so to speak, to home. But at the same time, in terms of home, I may say something which is probably many people radical for me. Needless to say, I appreciate very much that I did it eventually. In my life in America, is no comparison to my previous Soviet life, I never regretted. However, I want to remind that you have the ancient Greece exile was second after capital punishment for people, for especially when it comes to writers or so on, because you're no longer you're fed with something familiar from your childhood as you grow. I'll give you some example of that sort. Why I all of a sudden it came to me quite recently. As you know, there's a war between Russia and Ukraine, and since I was born and raised in the city of Odessa, the day I heard that Russian bombs fell on the streets of Odessa, I felt PTSD. That means I felt as I'm bombed, because as a child, I remember when the World War II came to Soviet Union, the German bombs bombed me and my mother on the way. I describe it in the book Shush, Growing Up Jewish under Stalin, in detail. I have even one scene of that sort. So what I'm saying is that it is, the home is where you not only grew up, but you are continue to feel like you're there. From that standpoint, I can say that I'm not home till now in full sense of it. But there is no question I would not want it to be anywhere else. I hope you understand what I mean. America gave me everything that I would wanted to have to begin with in my life. 20 years later, okay, in Soviet Union, in the year of still Stalin was alive, it was impossible even to think about getting education in humanities, being Jewish. In America, I did it in America 20 years later. 20 years later, okay? So by all means, it was not, how to say it, the Soviet Union that I left was not a place to aspire and to be. But that's the only thing that I knew at that time, yeah, unfortunately.
Thank you. I had a question about your experiences, the process of feeling at home in a different way, that is feeling at home writing in English. You're a member of a fairly small club of people who have made that transition. Nabokov famously, the Polish writers Joseph Conrad, Jerzy Kosinski, Michał Josil, who lives in Montreal now, also emigrated. Can you talk about that process of becoming an English author?
Well, I have to admit that obviously, I already talked about my English is not native English. I don't feel that kind of at ease writing in English as I feel in Russian. However, I would say that my how to say it, not active but passive English is better. In other words, most of the time I still write in Russian, and then I translate myself into English. And only after that, with the help of sometimes friends, American friends, native speakers, sometimes now there is a brilliant program, DEPL, DEPPL, which allows you to make a choice probably taken from Thesaurus, choice of what is exactly the word would be here. So from that standpoint, I made the transition, and frankly, I made the point to make to most of my books to appear in English, because I want there's not to be, frankly speaking, I'm afraid to be in ghetto, okay? Ghetto, the language, you understand, in the community. I want Americans to know about us, okay, about totally different life experience, human experiences. That's why most of my books, as you already said, were published on university presses. So the first book, memoir book, was published University of California Press, then the University of Wisconsin Press, the Joseph Crocodile, then University of the Northwestern University Press, Farewell Mama, Odessa. And this particular book was published also by academic press, McFarland's. So, yeah, that's what I'm saying. I would not. And again, Nabokov oftentimes brought up. Few people know that basically Nabokov's first language was English. In what sense that his father was ambassador of Russia in Great Britain, and at the age of 7, his father hired a Russian teacher to teach young Nabokov the Russian language. So, I mean, in other words, this is very important, the way you feel the language itself, which comes very early in your life. That's what it is. So from that standpoint, of course, I'm not comparing myself. Nothing like that even remotely happened in my life. So I do as much as I can now. Yeah.
Are there any other questions from the audience? No? All right. Well, I want to thank you immensely once again for a really entertaining but also instructive oral history, which you did today based on your book. And let me just remind people, the book is called Laughing All the Way to Freedom, The Americanization of a Russian Émigré. I don't know if you can see that with the blur, but anyway. Yeah, I have a blur, so it's probably, my computer is censoring your book, sorry. Yeah, thank you very much, Emil, and please do take a look at the book. It's got some wonderful, wonderful memories and also satirical stories. And if you're an American, you learn a lot about yourself and about not only about Soviet emigres. So thank you, everyone, for coming.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for having me. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Sure, my pleasure.